Picture this. Millions of people around the world think they know the real Queen Elizabeth II because they binged The Crown on Netflix. But here's the thing. Some of the most dramatic moments in that show never actually happened the way they portrayed them. The Crown became a global phenomenon, winning awards and shaping how an entire generation views the British royal family. But the creators themselves admitted they took serious creative liberties with the truth. And that's a problem because now we have this weird situation where fiction is being remembered as fact. People are forming real opinions about real people based on scenes that were completely made up. So today we're going through the biggest historical errors in The Crown and separating what really happened from what the writers invented for drama. Trust me, some of these are going to surprise you. Let's start with one of the most controversial storylines in the entire series, the portrayal of Prince Philip's alleged affairs. The show heavily implies that Philip was unfaithful to Elizabeth throughout their marriage. But here's what actually happened. There's never been any concrete evidence of Philip having affairs. The rumors existed, sure, but the Crown presents speculation as if it were documented fact. Royal biographers who spent decades researching the Queen's life have said repeatedly that Elizabeth and Philip had a strong, loving marriage. The show chose drama over truth on this one. Then there's the whole thing about Philip's mother, Princess Alice. The Crown shows her as this mentally unstable woman who was basically abandoned by her family. In reality, Princess Alice was an incredibly brave woman who hid Jewish families during the Holocaust and was later recognized as righteous among the nations. She wasn't some tragic figure locked away. She was a hero. The show also made it seem like Philip barely had a relationship with his mother, but the truth is he stayed in contact with her and she even lived at Buckingham Palace in her later years. Now, let's talk about Winston Churchill, because The Crown really did him dirty in some ways. They portrayed him as this senile old man who could barely function in his second term as Prime Minister. Was Churchill getting older and dealing with health issues? Yes, absolutely. But he wasn't the confused, bumbling figure the show depicts in several scenes. Churchill's private secretaries and people who worked with him said he remained sharp and capable of leading the country. The show exaggerated his decline for dramatic effect. There's also this famous episode where Churchill's secretary Venetia Scott dies in the Great Smog of 1952. It's incredibly emotional and shows Churchill being devastated by her death. Here's the problem. Venetia Scott never existed. She's a completely fictional character created by the writers to give Churchill an emotional story arc. The Great Smog was real, and it did kill thousands of people. But inventing a character to make Churchill seem more human is just strange. The real history was dramatic enough on its own. Moving on to Princess Margaret, because oh boy, did The Crown take liberties with her story. The show presents her as this rebellious party girl who was constantly at odds with Elizabeth. While Margaret definitely had a more carefree personality than her sister, the show wildly exaggerates their conflicts. They actually had a close relationship throughout their lives. The whole Peter Townsend situation gets twisted too. The Crown makes it seem like Elizabeth personally blocked Margaret from marrying him out of duty to the Crown. In reality, the decision was way more complicated and involved the government, the Church of England, and public opinion. Elizabeth didn't have the power to just say yes or no. The show also makes it look like Margaret was bitter and resentful toward Elizabeth for the rest of her life. But people close to both sisters said they remained loving siblings who supported each other. Then there's Margaret's relationship with Roddy Llewellyn, which the show portrays as this great, scandalous love affair. They definitely had a relationship, but the Crown dramatizes it way beyond what actually happened. Let's talk about the episode where Elizabeth visits Aberfan after the coal disaster that killed 144 people, mostly children. The Crown shows her as cold and unfeeling during this visit. This is one of the most unfair portrayals in the entire series. People who were actually there said the Queen was visibly moved and deeply affected by the tragedy. She later said that not going to Aberfan immediately was one of her biggest regrets as Queen. The show twists this into making her seem heartless when she actually cared deeply. The Crown also invented this whole storyline about Elizabeth being jealous of Jackie Kennedy. There's a scene where Jackie apparently criticizes Buckingham Palace and the Queen. According to people who were actually at the state dinner, Jackie Kennedy spoke highly of the Queen, and they got along well. The catty rivalry was made up for television. This matters because it shapes how people view these real women and their relationship with each other. Jackie and Elizabeth weren't enemies. They were two young women in incredibly difficult positions. Now, here's a big one. The show's portrayal of the Queen's relationship with her children, especially Charles. The Crown makes it seem like she was this distant, cold mother who never showed affection. Royal staff members and people who knew the family said Elizabeth was actually very loving with her children in private. She just came from a generation where public displays of affection weren't the norm. The show has these painful scenes where young Charles is basically ignored by his parents, but nannies and staff from that time period said both Elizabeth and Philip were involved parents by royal standards. Was Elizabeth a perfect mother? Probably not. She had an incredibly demanding job, but the Crown takes normal parenting challenges and turns them into neglect for dramatic purposes. There's also this whole thing about Charles feeling unloved, and that's why he turned to Camilla. The show presents this as simple cause and effect. But relationships are complicated, and reducing Charles and Diana's marriage problems to his parents didn't hug him enough is just lazy storytelling. The real reasons were much more complex. Speaking of Diana, let's talk about how the Crown handles her story. The show portrays her first meeting with the royal family at Balmoral with all these awkward, painful moments. Some of these scenes were exaggerated or changed for drama. Diana did feel out of place, but the show makes it seem worse than it was. The famous scene where Diana dances at the Royal Opera House and Charles is supposedly embarrassed. That's been disputed by people who were actually there that night. They said Charles was actually proud of Diana in that moment, not humiliated. The show chose to invent conflict where there might not have been any. Then there's the way the Crown depicts Diana's eating disorder and mental health struggles. These were very real issues that Diana bravely spoke about publicly, but the show sometimes uses her bulimia as a plot device rather than treating it with the sensitivity it deserves. Real people who struggle with eating disorders have criticized how it's portrayed. The series also compresses timelines and combines events to make Diana's story more dramatic. Things that happened over years are shown happening in weeks. Let's talk about the whole thing with Michael Fagan breaking into the Queen's bedroom. The Crown has this long scene where he sits and talks with her about his problems. In reality, the Queen left the room almost immediately and raised the alarm. They didn't have some deep conversation about Thatcher's policies. Fagan himself has said the conversation in the show never happened. The writers invented an entire dialogue that supposedly reveals Elizabeth's political views. This is a problem because the Crown keeps saying it's based on truth, but then it invents these crucial character-defining moments out of thin air. The show's portrayal of Margaret Thatcher is another controversial area. The Crown depicts Thatcher and Elizabeth as having this tense, difficult relationship full of political disagreements. While they definitely had different styles and probably different views on some issues, the show exaggerates their conflicts. Both women were professionals who worked together for over a decade. There's a scene where Elizabeth supposedly leaks information to the press about disagreeing with Thatcher. This caused a real scandal, but the truth of what happened is still disputed. The Crown presents one version of events as absolute fact when historians still debate what actually occurred. That's not responsible storytelling about real, recent history. The portrayal of Prince Charles is particularly harsh throughout the series. The show often presents him as weak, whiny, and so. Is Charles a complicated person who's made mistakes? Absolutely. But the Crown rarely shows his charitable work, his environmental activism, or his genuine qualities. They cherry-picked the worst moments and interpretations to create a character rather than showing a full human being. It's one-sided storytelling. The same thing happens with Camilla. She's portrayed almost as a villain in Diana's story, but people who know her say she's actually quite kind and funny. Again, you can criticize people's choices without turning them into cartoon villains. The real story is more nuanced than the Crown wants to admit. Let's talk about how the show handles the royal family's reaction to major national events. They often show Elizabeth as out of touch or uncaring, but the reality is that the Queen dedicated her entire life to public service and took her role incredibly seriously. She wasn't sitting around being cold and distant. The show also loves to create these moments where Elizabeth supposedly realizes she needs to change or modernize the monarchy. These epiphany scenes are almost always invented. Change in the royal family happened gradually over decades, not in dramatic moments of realization like The Crown suggests. Real institutional change is slow and complicated. Here's another major issue. The Crown often shows private conversations between people in rooms where only they were present. How could the writers possibly know what was said? They couldn't, obviously. These scenes are imagined, based on what the writers think might have been said, but viewers don't always realize that, when you watch a historical drama, your brain files away these scenes as things that happened even though they're completely made up. That's dangerous with recent history. The show also has a habit of taking rumor and gossip and presenting it as confirmed fact. The royal family attracts tons of speculation and unverified stories. The Crown sometimes treats tabloid rumors the same way it treats documented historical events. That's misleading and unfair to the real people being portrayed. Let's talk about the aesthetic choices too. The Crown is beautifully made, and that actually makes the problem worse. It looks so real and authoritative that people assume it must be accurate. The gorgeous cinematography, the perfect costumes, the attention to detail in sets, all of this creates an illusion of historical accuracy that the actual script doesn't deliver. People trust what they see more than what they read, and The Crown uses that psychological trick to make fiction feel like documentary. It's manipulative in a way. Now, the creators of The Crown have always said it's a drama, not a documentary. Peter Morgan, the writer, has been clear about taking creative liberties. But here's the thing. Most viewers don't read interviews with the creators. They just watch the show and assume it's accurate because it's about real, recent events. There's a responsibility that comes with dramatizing real people's lives, especially when those people are still alive or recently deceased. The Crown doesn't always honor that responsibility. Some people defend the show by saying, everyone knows it's drama and entertainment, but study after study shows that historical dramas genuinely shape what people believe about history. Younger viewers, especially, who didn't live through these events, have no other frame of reference. The Crown becomes their truth by default. The show had an opportunity to be both entertaining and accurate, but it consistently chose drama over truth. That's a shame, because the real history is fascinating enough. Queen Elizabeth II lived through incredible change and served for over 70 years. Her real story, with all its complexity and nuance, is more interesting than The Crown's simplified version. The problem isn't that The Crown exists. Historical dramas have always taken liberties. The problem is that it's treated as fact by millions of viewers worldwide. It's also worth noting that the royal family can't really defend themselves or correct the record without seeming petty or drawing more attention to the show. They're stuck. Meanwhile, The Crown gets to tell whatever story it wants, with the real people unable to respond. That's an imbalance of power that makes you think twice about what's fair. So, what should you take away from all this? First, The Crown is entertainment, not education. Enjoy it as a drama, but don't mistake it for a history lesson. Second, if you're genuinely interested in Queen Elizabeth II and the royal family, read actual biographies by respected historians. They're out there and they're fascinating. Third, be skeptical of any historical drama that shows private conversations or claims to know what people were thinking or feeling. Those parts are always invented. The real Queen Elizabeth II was a remarkable woman who navigated incredible challenges with grace and dedication. She deserves to be remembered accurately, not through a distorted Netflix lens. Her legacy is complex and worth examining honestly, both the good and the questionable. But that examination should be based on facts, not speculation presented as truth. The Crown is well-made television, but it's not history. Keep that distinction clear, and you'll be fine. Just don't let a TV show replace actual learning about real events. At the end of the day, we should all be more media literate about what we watch and how it shapes our understanding of the world. Question everything, especially the beautifully filmed stuff. Check out the next video to learn more about royal history.